For generations, the people of the Raven had pushed northwards across the vast plains of Central Asia. They were the nomadic tribesmen who followed the game as their numbers grew, and the game was depleted before them. At that far-off time, the northern oceans were in the grip of ice, shrouded in the sheets of polar pack that froze the seas in the fourth and most recent ice age. The seafloor of the Bering Strait, joining Asia and America, was exposed as a land bridge, a great plain rich in the bounty of mammoth, moose, elk, and caribou. Before these people stretched the endless rolling tundras of Alaska's North Slope at the very top of the world. Hungrily, they flooded into the void of this game-filled haven, calling it Alyeska, the Great Land. Alaska has been hundreds of millions of years in the making. Cataclysmic forces beneath the Earth's crust have over the eons thrust peaks and jagged pinnacles thousands of feet into the air. Earthquakes have ravaged the land, buckling the coastal plains into mountain ranges, tilting the valleys into the sea. Alaska may be measured by the range of its extremes. Comprising 1/5 the area of the United States, it is by far the largest state of the Union. It has more rivers, more islands, higher mountains, longer coastlines, and greater extremes of climate than any other state. So unexplored and untouched is Alaska that less than 1/20th of 1% has been altered by the hand of man. The remainder is a wilderness of unparalleled grandeur. Outbursts of volcanic activity have, in the past, exploded into violent and catastrophic eruption, forging new landscapes. The volcanism of the Aleutian mountain range continues beyond the Alaska Peninsula to a chain of islands. Born of fire from the sea, the Aleutians stretch 1,400 miles to the west and almost to the shores of Asia. The tectonic forces molding Alaska have, in the south and east, wrinkled mountain barriers to the height of 20,000 feet and more. Granite spires guard the portals of the highest pinnacle in all of North America, Mount McKinley. The land has been designed by the great architects of weather, by wind, water, and ice. all here must submit to the punishing moods of nature. Even mighty Mount McKinley is not immune from attack. Hanging glaciers claw at the sky-high ridges between her peaks, crack and smash the granite of her sheer ramparts, sculpting the fluted columns and faceting their edges. And still she stands aloof. Denali, the Great One. In winter, bitter winds blast these mountains at hurricane force. Locked-in temperatures that dip to 80 below, the land may be frozen to depths of 2,000 feet. And in the long dark of winter's night, life is stilled to its lowest ebb. Emerging from their crystalline snow cocoon, 3 million lakes materialize on the Alaskan landscape in summer. The surface of the land melts, seems itself to be on the move. From the highest peaks, 10,000 rivers and streams carve their way to the ocean. 10 of them alone are more than 300 miles in length. Of summer, the pulse of the Arctic tundra quickens. Dormant, withered plants blossom profusely in a desperate race against the seasonal time clock. Ducks, geese, and shorebirds may travel 5,000 to 10,000 miles to visit Alaska each summer and raise their broods in the flowering tundra. Some have migrated from as far away as South America, Antarctica, China, or Hawaii. Grizzlies rise from their winter sleep and roam the wetlands for roots and grasses. The midnight sun burns bright on the Alaskan plains, and the continuous daylight is a time for feasting. For 6 months or more, Alaska is a land of plenty, and life is lived to the fullest. This is the land through which the caribou migrate in the summer months, animals numbering in tens of thousands. The great herds move restlessly, covering huge areas in their ceaseless search for fresh pastures. They pause momentarily in their year-long drive to calve, before gathering momentum once again towards their wintering grounds. The lengthening days of summer cause salmon to desert their feeding grounds where they have gained strength in the early spring to face the ordeal to come. In the wilderness of open ocean, there are no landmarks to guide them along their migration routes. Relying perhaps on celestial navigation or their acute sense of smell, the salmon swim relentlessly to the mouth of the river from which they drifted as fingerlings 2 or 3 years before. The salmon steeplechase begins in June as countless millions flood like a silver stream up Alaska's rivers towards their birthplace. They bring fresh bounty to the summer hunters in Alaska, and all partake of the feast. When the first chill winds of fall sweep down from the north, the salmon migration is over, and the rivers run their course through the Alaskan wilderness unchallenged once more. This land was inherited by the people of the Raven. They reaped the summer salmon harvest, hunted moose, deer, and bears, trapped wolverine, wolf, and beaver for the winter warmth of their furs. For 40,000 years and more, They roamed the vast plains of the tundra, explored its furthest boundaries, spread to the forests of the south. They were the ancestors of the North American Indian, the nomadic Athabascan, Eyak, Tuchan, Dakina, and the Shinket of Alaska's southeast. Their totems, lore, and dance are deeply steeped in the spirits of the forests and mountains. Above the highest streams where the salmon breed, the mountains are cloaked in a mantle of white. Jagged peaks, besieged by oceans of ice, jut naked into the sky. For 1,000,000 years and more, ice has sculpted this landscape. Mountainous beds of compacted snow have produced over 5,000 glaciers that grind their tortuous way towards the ocean. Rock debris, carved from the hillsides, patterns the glacier's pristine slopes. Crevasses and pinnacles develop as the streaming tongue of ice is deformed along the uneven contours of the valleys. Inexorably, the glacial wall is sacrificed by the pressures from behind at its final destination, the ocean. In summer, brash ice, fragments of history, choke Alaska's southeastern fjords. The storm-ravaged coasts of winter become the focus for myriads of life in spring and summer. Seabirds by their tens of millions swarm in from the open ocean to breed on Alaska's cliffs and islands. Hawks and auklets, gulls and cormorants line the cliffs. The air is filled with their vibrant cries, the urgent beat of their wings. With 1,800 islands and 34,000 miles of coast, Alaska has more shoreline than the rest of the United States put together, and is a haven for the profusion of sea life in summer. Sea lions, too, return to their rocky ramparts for a noisy, boisterous season on innumerable offshore islands, where they bask, play, and feed in the rich surrounding waters. The wealth of sea life along the fringes of the Bering Land Bridge attracted new pioneers from Siberia little more than 10,000 years ago. The Eskimo and the Aleut, whose domains are the coastal plain, the islands, and the sea. As master mariners, they sought the walrus, whales, and seals, fished the frigid Arctic waters. They dared the open seas in kayaks and umiaks to hunt their prey, and feasted on the migrating caribou in summer. They learned to adapt to the Arctic climate, to live with the wilderness, to rejoice in its beauty. Russians, Alaska's first white pioneers, were drawn to these shores in the 1740s, lured by the prolific fur-bearing herds of marine mammals. The Pribilof fur seals were the last to be touched, and not by the Russians, who plundered other fur resources, but their story is the same. On these islands alone, the once proud herds, estimated at 2.5 million, were decimated. The shores grew empty and silent. Alaska is a land of feast or famine, of dearth or plenty. By careful management, the fur seal herds recovered. Over the course of 4 decades, their serried ranks have swelled to 1.25 million along the shores of the remote Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea. The Russian Orthodox religion is a lasting heritage of the pre-American era. But by 1868, the Russian territories in Alaska had become American. It was a hostile land and hardly explored. A remote frontier, known derisively by the lower 48 as Seward's Folly, Wall Russia, Icelandia. In the summer of 1897, the cry of gold rang out from the barren and desolate hills of the Klondike and echoed to the furthest corners of the earth. Stockbrokers, bank clerks, farmers, greenhorns all, responded to the lure of gold and stormed the Yukon territories. Many and devious were the routes to Dawson, heartland of the gold strike. The most famed trails started from Skagway and nearby Daya, gateway to the gold fields. "20,000 men joined the stampede through the frontier town of Skagway, through the dark and forbidding winter of 1898. The ways were long, the paths were perilous. Each man had to haul a year's supply of food and equipment over the grueling passes to the frozen shores of Lake Bennett. Only the iron-willed survived the ordeal and the ongoing journey by boat to Dawson. And disappointment awaited most on arrival. They were too late. The grub stakes were taken. The rush was over. In 1899, White Pass Railroad was completed. Next to the awesome White Pass Trail trodden by the fortune hunters of the year before, and a link that still exists today. For 3 short summers, Skagway flourished as a frontier town, glittered with gold briefly, and was soon passed by. Nearly a century later, the character of the old town, nurtured by the grip of history, still lives on. The gold rush passed in fevered leaps from one remote and desolate spot on Alaska's wilderness to another. And in time, nature reclaimed her own. In 1957, another gold, black gold, was discovered. First in the Cook Inlet and later on Alaska's North Slope. The oil wells, set on just 120 square miles of tundra, annually supply almost 1/3 of all American domestic oil production. The Alyeska pipeline stretches 800 miles from the Arctic shores at Prudhoe Bay to Valdez in the south. This artery of oil passes over 3 mountain ranges, 350 rivers and streams, and countless lakes. It gushes 1.5 million barrels of oil each day to the thirsty supertankers lined up at the ice-free port of Valdez. Alaska has been built on the foundation stones of the robust and vital people drawn to its borders. From the people of the Raven who learned the secrets of this wilderness and who feasted with the swell of its tide, to the trapper, the hunter, the prospector, who lusted for the love of the wild, who fought the challenge of its bittersweet moods. It was these frontiersmen of whom Robert Service wrote. This is the law of the Yukon, and ever she makes it plain. Send not your foolish and feeble. Send me your strong and your sane, strong for the red rage of battle, sane for I harry them sore. Send me men girt for the combat, men who are grit to the core, swift as the panther in triumph, fierce as the bear in defeat, sired of a bulldog parent, steeled in the furnace heat. Send me the best of your breeding. Lend me your chosen ones. Them will I take to my bosom. Them will I call my sons. Seward's Folly, Icelandia, Wall Russia. The land sold by the Russians for the sum of $7.2 million has paid for itself 1,000-fold and promises many treasures to come. But transcending the enormous mineral wealth of this great land is perhaps the rarest asset left in the world. The wilderness, with all its solitude and untouched beauty. Here, after the knife-edged frost bites deep, and bitter winds howl around craggy peaks during the dark winter's night, then it is that life returns north to the tundra, to the islands and the mountains, to feast and rejoice in the prophet of summer, to Alaska, the great land.